This video is possibly the most important video on this channel. I'm going to discuss a critical problem, the problem for critics, any moviegoer, any art lover whatsoever. It's a fundamental problem to all of us. I think it has been for all time. So, okay, here's the problem, and I'm going to go over it over and over again so that you can get the gist of it. When a movie depicts anything, person, event, anything you can see or hear in a movie, is it merely showing us what exists in reality in some respect? Or is it telling us, when it shows us this thing, to accept, embrace, begin to believe in, or continue to believe in that thing, event, or person? Put another way, are movies merely describing some part of reality to us? Reality here includes what we could see or hear, what we could experience, what other people do, what they dream, feel, desire, so internal as well as external things in reality. So thus I include, when I talk about reality, anything that is in the realm of human imagination and consciousness. That's what I mean by internal. But external is sensory perception, what you can see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. So do movies merely describe reality to us, just depict it as it is? Or are movies prescribing reality to us, telling us to accept what the movie says is real, or reject what it says is real? This is what I call the describe-prescribe problem, a problem in all of art, but definitely in movies. And here's an example of it. In the modern world, in Hollywood in the last 15 to 20, maybe 30 years, smoking has been verboten. The MPAA, the rating system for Hollywood, has actually put on warning labels on movies. Hey, there's smoking in this movie, beware. And telling us that maybe smoking is bad. Whenever a movie shows smoking, that's necessarily bad. So should movies show people smoking in them? If you were in the 1940s, that would be an absolutely bizarre question. And in fact, today, of course, people still smoke all the time. They smoke many different substances, but mostly I'm talking about cigarettes. So in one sense, movies should just describe the real world and show people smoking. If a character smokes, great. You know that real people in the real world do in fact smoke cigarettes. But there's another way to look at this. When we see people smoking in movies, does that encourage us to smoke because it looks cool, or a Hollywood star is smoking and he or she has an aura about him when we want to be that person? Does smoking on movies, it's like monkey see, monkey do. Do we want to imitate that person? Or not just imitate, not just go out and smoke, but feel that it's acceptable to do so even if we ourselves are not going to go smoke? So the two sides of this problem being, movies should describe smoking because it's real, but they shouldn't actually show smoking, which has been a standard view for a number of years, because it might encourage people to not smoke necessarily, but accept smoking as a reasonable practice, even though, and this is the argument, smoking might cause cancer or some nasty illness. Another great example comes from a comment I had on my channel on a movie called The Power of the Dog, where the viewer says, hitting or hurting an animal will always make me turn off a movie. Now, I don't know why this person objects to seeing animals get hit or hurt in movies. We know that in the real world, animals are hit or hurt or killed all the time. They have been probably every day for hundreds of thousands of years by human beings. And so isn't it reasonable then for a movie just to show us that? Because, hey, it's part of reality, and art, of course, is about depicting reality. But this person objects to seeing hurt or hit animals on film, and there's a number of movie warnings telling us, animals did not get hurt in this movie. People don't want to see it. People think it might argue for violence against animals or the acceptance thereof. So the describe-prescribe problem goes back to an old philosophical conundrum. I know this is reductive, but it's the old philosophical question of idealism versus realism. Is a movie an ideal that we should strive for, or maybe it's signaling that we should not go with it? But is a movie about oughts, what we ought to be or ought not to be, or is it about what could be seen, what has existed in the past? Again, to put it another way, does art show us, and I think it does, what exists today, what has existed in the past, what could exist either in the future or some alternate reality? Or, and I think this is true as well, does art argue for a cause? Does it send a message? What message is it sending? So again, I call this the describe-prescribe problem. Describe being describe reality, prescribe being telling us what reality is or what we should accept as reality. Every moviegoer, I think every person watching any movie has to make some kind of determination. And here's what the determination is what I'm watching signaling that it should be taken as description or prescription, as a statement of, here's what exists or what you could experience in a film showing you is like a portal to the reality. Or is what you see in a film more a statement of here's what should or should not be. This fundamental problem is the basis of all concerns ever, I think, about what's in a movie, from rating systems in America and other countries to parents or authorities, government authorities, banning or allowing films based on certain criteria of what human being is, like their age, for example. And it goes to the classic question of the holy trinity of problems in movies: violence, sex, and language. Showing gun violence or erotica or showing harsh language. All of these are in the real world. You can go experience them, and probably don't. I don't recommend it, but go experience them. You can see them, or people have experienced them. So when a movie shows them to us directly, or any one of them, such as gun violence, well, how do we know if that movie is just showing us gun violence because it's what exists in the world, or whether it's arguing for us to engage in it or accept it, or something like that? Now, a lot of people might respond, hey, it's art, and art is open-ended, and we should allow whatever in art because, hey, it's art, and it's divorced from reality. It's a simulation, or it's a dream, and it's not reality itself, and people can know the difference between those two. I actually don't think it's as simple as that. I sympathize with that a bit. But every single human culture that I've ever studied or looked at, every single one has its taboos, its bugaboos, things it doesn't allow. It bans certain things, it looks down on other things, and thus it doesn't allow certain things to be depicted in artwork. As I argued right here, even in the modern open world of America, very open and tolerant of all kinds of things, yet smoking and violence to some extent, but definitely animal violence, other things like that are disallowed. People get upset at them. For example, in America today, the N-word, you can't say it. It's not allowed, in most settings at least. And you get an awful punishment, social punishment, if you said it on film or in some other venue. And also for those people who would say, well, it's just art, it should depict anything, you can probably think of some heinous or horrible thing in the world that actually exists or happens, some awful crime, and then you probably can figure out that, hey, I never want to see that in a movie. And I'm not even going to name what those awful, horrible, terrible things are. They're probably on the internet somewhere in places you don't go. But there's got to be, for each one of you, something that you don't even want to see or think about being depicted in a movie. I think these taboos, they do depend on time and place. Obviously, they change wildly over time. Some of them are maybe more universal than others. But I do think it's almost fact to me that universally taboos exist in every culture. A set of taboos exists, especially those that can be depicted in art or not. One example is today, every time I upload a video, I have to click a number of boxes that say my videos don't have all kinds of things in them. YouTube is very, I would say, puritanical, maybe for good reason, maybe not. They don't want advertisers to have to deal with these problems, but they have a whole list of things you have to click. Just look at this list. One of my favorite examples of movies having this prescribed problem, I like to look at things historically, so I go back to, say, the Hays Code from 1930s, which lasted roughly between the 1930s to 50s for Hollywood movies. The Hays Code said what movies could allow and could not allow. This very interesting read. You should check this Hays Code out because it will be like a different place in time, a bizarre set of taboos for most of you. One of those is that the Hays Code does not allow childbirth. You cannot show it. You cannot even suggest it. So you get a movie like a great Western, like Stagecoach, for example, which I show in my film class. And a number of students watch that, and for the first time, they don't notice that a particular female character is pregnant. In fact, the movie doesn't even say it in dialogue. It doesn't even show it. She doesn't look pregnant at all. But then, a baby pops up later in the movie, and she's gone through childbirth, which you don't see in the movie at all. The question is, why does this movie signal pregnancy and deal a little bit more with childbirth than it does? And the reason is the Hays Code. Something in the Hays Code about childbirth making us think of erotica or things that are nasty or disallowed. You contrast that with a TV show from recent years called Call the Midwife, and they nearly show everything in terms of childbirth on that show. So of course, times and values have changed. Long ago, you couldn't show childbirth on film. Now, you can show almost probably everything. Another interesting relic from the Hays Code, they actually say this outright, is you can't depict ministers or religious figures in a negative light. You shouldn't do that at all. This is a really interesting example because I kind of sympathize with what they're getting at here, and I think you could too. What they're saying is if you depict a minister or religious figure, say a priest, in a negative light, you're actually saying that all priests, or the type of priests, or the church, the priest represents the church, is negative, bad, harmful, and so on. Not that the particular priest character is bad, but that he represents the whole thing, the church or the priesthood and so on. Common critical problem: does one character represent a whole group or whole set of ideas or an institution, or is that character so particular that it's just one particular person? I think most of us would acknowledge that, yeah, there are lots of nasty, horrible ministers, priests, and so on doing awful things in the world, and thus when a movie depicts realistically a bad priest or a bad minister, it's reasonable because they exist in the real world. On the other hand, the Hays Code is jumping to the other side, saying, hey, movies are making an argument about the particular character as a type, and we want to honor religious institutions. We don't want to show them in a bad light. We want people to think good of the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, or whatever religion you want to talk about here. And so we should not depict these religious authorities in a bad light, even if a few of them exist in the real world. So here's my problem. Whenever I watch any movie whatsoever, I'm asking myself constantly, what, if anything, is this movie arguing for? And how do I know it's arguing for that thing if I think it is? Big question for any critic is, what particular mountain of evidence do you have to prove that a movie is arguing for the thing you say it's arguing for or against? Every critic, pro or amateur, doesn't matter who they are, has to have a coherent and, I think, a thorough argument when he or she answers that question. Here's an example. This is going to be now super controversial. Today, you can't, or it's disallowed generally speaking, and because of Hollywood rules, you can't have an all-white or all-European cast. You need to have some kind of minority figure, or a group of minority figures in your movie. Now, of course, this is ideological, an ideological imposition posed upon art because, of course, in the real world, you can find certain places, wherever those are, where there are mostly or all white people. So thus, if a movie depicts an all-white cast or an all-white world, place, and time, that does really exist in the real world. Why would that be disallowed? Well, the reason it's disallowed is because of ideology. We needed a diversity list of actors and characters in order to affirm certain views, and if we have an all-white cast, that may be encouraging certain things or ideologies that we don't like or disagree with. Another classic example of the describe-prescribe problem, this is one of my favorites, is who is the villain in a movie? And when people watch a movie, and this has to do with the religious minister thing, and they see a Russian as a bad guy, or a conservative Christian, or a federal government bureaucrat, or an environmentalist, and that's the bad guy, is the movie arguing that that particular person represents a whole group, and thus the movie has an argument against that group? Or, if this is literature, this particular person is just a person, an individual, and we know that, well, most federal government bureaucrats or most Russians are pretty good, nice people, but this particular one in this particular movie is bad, and that's what we're really showing in this movie. We're not making an argument about Russians or federal government agents. This problem is one of the sources of why there are wild disagreements over movies and when you get into arguments, because some people see the realism in a movie or how it's lining up with the real world, how it's being realistic in some way. Other people are seeing the ideology or the arguments in a movie and are coming at it from that way. So here are my general suggestions about this problem. First, I think everybody, all of you, should notice what a culture allows and doesn't allow in art or on film. So that will tell you a great deal about the particular cultures or places, worldviews, and taboos, what they think is good or evil, what they think the system of ethics is, what is right and wrong, and so on. So instead of being just within that culture and accepting its views and not thinking about them, I think everyone should stand outside their own culture and look at it from the outside as a sociologist might, for a minute, and think about, okay, what are we banning, what are we allowing, and why are we banning and allowing those? What are our reasons? Do we have good ones or not? So I think everybody should stand outside their own culture and view, try to, if you possibly can, to see how this works. My second suggestion, be aware of your own frameworks of interpretation, what you're placing onto a movie, how you're seeing it, and by what criteria you're looking at a movie. We know that some people, you probably do this, come at a film from a historical angle, perspective, historical context, some from psychological perspectives, theological, political, or a blend of all of those. So when you are aware of your own frameworks and biases and what you think a movie is arguing for because you're biased or you have these frameworks, you might actually catch yourself reading into a movie, which is not necessarily wrong, but reading into a movie something that other people wouldn't see or would see differently. And last, I already said this, have a mountain of evidence for your view. You need to have all kinds of bits of dialogue, character actions from all over the movie, see the movie as a whole, look at its particular parts, And then you'll see, I think, that your arguments are fair, they're valid, they have some merit. They would stand up for people who have opposite views of you. Or if you're just, using your own ideology or framework and placing it on the movie, but not seeing everything that's in the movie, because movies, almost all movies, are super complicated, and there's more than 15 ways to see each one of them. So notice all those little things and have a mountain of evidence for your particular view. Now, do you have other examples, particular movies? What do you think about this video? Let us know in the comments, and please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thanks, and have a great day. I think one of the solutions to the describe-prescribe problem is, and it takes wisdom and nuance, is context. It's not about what's in a movie, but the context for it, how it's shown, the sequence in which it's shown, the ways in which it's shown cinematographically and sonically. And there's context questions all over the place in a movie, not just within a movie, but also historical context questions as well. So context matters, and it's not just about whether something's in a movie or not.